Welcome back to the Soy Farmer, and the new video is ready for you.
Elias Brant was not the kind of man who explained himself. He had grown up in Harden County watching men explain themselves. At feed stores, at bank counters, at the edges of other people's fields. And he had noticed that the men who explained themselves most were usually the men who had the least to show for their explaining. So when the county assessor's office recorded the sale of the Whitmore parcel in the spring of 2009, 270 acres of white-crusted, mineral-poisoned bottomland that had not produced a commercial crop in 11 years. And when the buyer's name on the deed was listed as Elias Brant, age 44, formerly of the Brant family's 80-acre row crop operation on the east side of the county. Elias did not explain himself to anyone who asked. He let the deed speak. The deed was quiet, the same as he was. The laughter started within the week. Hardin County was not a cruel place, but it was an honest one, and the honest assessment of 270 acres of salt-damaged bottomland purchased for $31,000. A price so low the selling bank had listed the parcel 3 times before finding a buyer, was that the buyer had made a serious mistake. The soil on the Whitmore parcel had been damaged across 2 decades by poor drainage management and the gradual accumulation of sodium deposits from an irrigation source that an earlier owner had not tested adequately and had used too long. The result was a hard-pan layer of saline soil that repelled water, repelled root structure, and repelled the kind of optimism that farming required. The Extension Office had assessed it in 2004 and used language in their report that stopped just short of the word permanent. The word they used was severely compromised, which in the usage of agricultural extension offices means the same thing with better manners. 3 of the men who laughed were men Elias had known since school. He did not hold it against them. They were reading the land the way the extension report read it, which was accurately, as far as the extension report went. Elias was reading something else. He had first walked the Whitmore parcel in the autumn of 2006, before it went to the bank, before the 3rd listing, before the price dropped to the number that made people laugh. He had walked it in October, when the vegetation pattern was clearest, and he had seen 2 things the extension report had not weighted heavily enough. The first was the topography of the water table. Not its current state, but its historical behavior, visible in the mineral staining on the old fence posts and in the sediment layering on the north bank of the drainage channel that ran along the parcel's western edge. The water table had not always been where it was. Something upstream had changed it. The second thing he saw was the eastern tree line, a stand of Osage, orange, and native persimmon that had survived on the parcel's highest ground and that was producing fruit in the fall of 2006 with a kind of quiet persistence that indicated deep root systems finding water that the surface conditions did not suggest was there. Elias stood under those trees for a long time. He ate a persimmon. He thought about what the roots knew that the extension report did not. He bought the parcel in March of 2009 and began working it in April, alone, without hired help, with a methodology that he had been refining in his own notebooks for 3 years before the purchase, and that he did not share with anyone because it was not finished yet, and because sharing unfinished thinking with people who had already decided you were wrong was a waste of the thinking. The first 2 years were soil years. Gypsum applied in precise quantities to specific sections based on Elias's own soil sampling, not the Extension Office's sampling, which had been done in a dry September. His sampling was done across 4 seasons, 12 locations, 3 depths. The gypsum displaced the sodium. It did not do this quickly. It did not do this uniformly. It did it the way real reclamation works, which is slowly and in the order the soil dictates rather than the order the calendar prefers. He planted a cover crop rotation in the 2nd year. Austrian winter pea into sorghum Sudan. Not for yield, not for sale, but for root mass and organic matter, and the particular nitrogen relationship between legume roots and compromised subsoil that Elias had read about in a university paper from an agricultural research station in Utah that had been working salt-damaged irrigation ground since the 1970s, and that almost nobody in Hardin County had read, because almost nobody in Hardin County had thought it was relevant. In year 3, he redirected the drainage channel. Not rebuilt it, redirected. A precise, low-cost modification to the western channel that changed the outlet grade by 14 inches and altered the water table behavior across the northern 60 acres in exactly the way his fence post readings had suggested it could be altered. The modification cost him $1,100 in materials and 3 weeks of his own labor. The county drainage engineer, when Elias described what he planned to do, told him it would have no meaningful effect. Elias thanked him for his time and did it anyway. By year 4, the northern 60 acres were producing not exceptional yields, not county record yields, yields that any farmer in Hardin County would have recognized as solid, respectable, unremarkable commercial production from good ground, from ground that the Extension Office had called severely compromised, from ground that had sold for a price that made people laugh. By year 6, the full 270 acres were in production. Elias planted soybeans on the reclaimed Bottomland that season, and the yield monitors on his combine recorded numbers that he wrote in his notebook without comment and presented to the grain elevator without ceremony, the way a man presents something that was always going to happen once the ground was ready and the calendar had caught up to the plan. The county extension agent that year was a younger man named Patrick Greeley, 31 years old, 2 years into the post, trained at the State Land Grant University with genuine ability and a specific intellectual honesty of someone young enough to still be surprised by things. Patrick pulled Elias's yield records at the elevator and drove out to the Whitmore parcel on a Thursday in October to look at the ground. He walked the fields for 2 hours. He took his own soil samples. He came back to Elias's equipment barn and sat down at the workbench and asked Elias to explain what he had done and in what order. Elias looked at him for a moment. He had explained himself to very few people in his life. He decided Patrick Greeley was worth the explanation. He talked for an hour and 40 minutes. Patrick did not interrupt once. He filled 19 pages of a legal pad. When Elias finished, Patrick sat with his notes for a while and then said, "The drainage redirect alone, that 14-inch grade change. Do you understand what that means for the other salt-damaged bottomland parcels in this county?" Elias said he had a number in his head. He named it. Patrick looked up from his notes. There were over 4,000 acres of salt-compromised bottomland in Hardin County, most of it written off, some of it returned to the tax rolls as non-productive, all of it sitting in the same hydrological basin as the Whitmore parcel, all of it subject to the same upstream drainage history that Elias had read in fence post stains in October 2006, while everyone else was reading the extension report. Patrick asked him why he had not published any of this, why he had not contacted the university, the extension service, the drainage district. Elias was quiet for a moment. He picked up his coffee. He said, "I needed to know it worked before I told anyone it would work. That is the only way you earn the right to tell someone something will work." Patrick wrote that down too. The paper Patrick co-authored with Elias Brant and 2 researchers from the State University's Soil Science Department was published 18 months later. It was cited by the Regional Agricultural Drainage Consortium within a year. 3 neighboring counties began pilot reclamation programs on salt-compromised bottomland the following spring, using the Whitmore parcel methodology as their baseline. The men who had laughed in 2009 did not laugh now. Most of them did not say anything at all, which is the particular silence of people who have watched someone be right in a way that is too large and too patient to argue with. One of them, a man named Gerald Foss, who had been the loudest in 2009 and who farmed 300 acres of conventionally productive ground on the county's east side, drove to Elias's farm on a Saturday morning 2 years after the paper was published and knocked on the door and asked, plainly and without preamble, whether Elias would walk his low ground with him and tell him what he saw. Elias put on his boots. He did not say, "I told you." He did not say anything about 2009. He walked Gerald Foss's low ground for 3 hours and told him exactly what he saw, the way a man shares something that cost him years in silence and $31,000 on a piece of ground everyone said was finished. Not to prove a point, but because the ground was still there and the ground still needed someone to read it right. The real revelation is scale. Elias's quiet, solo reclamation of 270 acres was not just a personal vindication. It was the proof of concept for recovering over 4,000 acres of written-off land across the county. The man everyone laughed at had been working in isolation on a solution to a problem the entire county didn't know it had. And he waited until it worked before he told anyone it would.